Yo, 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 what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and get ready. I am so excited. Oh man, the passion is overflowing for this video today. We're going to talk about how Call of Dragons is having an identity crisis. However, for those of you that enjoy these topical conversations where I will sometimes do deep dives, I'll give you a lot of historical references, comparisons, facts, data. You are going to enjoy this one because it's going to be pretty action-packed. And I'm going to try and go through the points as quick as I can. However, let me preface by saying before we start, this is never going to be a slight video or talking about how bad the game is or anything like that. You know me, that's not really my style. I don't do those types of things. However, I do think it's important for us to be able to analyze and see things from afar on how are things going, how are they progressing, how are they starting, what does it look like when changes are made, and then how are things kind of ending or where are we at currently, right, when it comes to the meta or the frontier. So, now let's talk about what are the actual points. Number one, Alliance versus Kingdom. This is something that is interesting to me because when you look at the history of some games, for example, Rise of Kingdoms, Infinity Kingdom, prior to Call of Dragons coming out, which ideally we'll probably use a little bit more Rise of Kingdom references here, but I'll also kind of give you a wider range as well for games that I've played and have a little bit more of a plethora of experience in. The reason why when we talk about Alliance vs. Kingdom is that this idea is very interesting on how you look at a game like Rock, which was previously Rise of Civilization, started out, right? You're talking alpha, beta, and then eventually getting into global, doing the name rebrand, and obviously now being known as ROK. The interesting part here is that most of these games, we're talking early, like years ago, would start off as, oh, okay, well, I need to be the strongest player. I need to be a top player, right, in this kingdom that I'm in. And okay, I'll join an alliance here and there. But most of it really came from players themselves kind of looking out for themselves, starting out, and wanting to progress their accounts individually without really having this kind of alliance-focused mindset first. This eventually evolved into more of, okay, now we really need to bunker down on investing into alliances, having an organized, coordinated group, not just being a shell that has a bunch of people in it, right? But we need to evolve and have more of an alliance-focused mindset. And then you look at after global release for Rock, and then you start getting this idea of seeing, for example, super kingdoms, right? And for some of you who might be familiar, kingdoms like 1196, 1093, right? These were more of what, like 1256. These are kingdoms where you would look at and say, okay, well, these are more powerhouse kingdoms, right? These were some of the strongest kingdoms in the games for years. Some of them still are. And the reason why they were able to do things like this is because they invested in a kingdom-focused mindset first and foremost for the majority controlling interest or the majority controlling group that started out going into these kingdoms. And then you ended up seeing, and I'm trying to remember right now for my time in Infinity Kingdom, I think it was like 57 and 32 or 30 or 37 and 50 something, but there's essentially two top kingdoms in Infinity Kingdom, and they started off pretty early investing into a kind of kingdom-wide focus versus that of an alliance focus. And that's one of the biggest reasons why they were able, now again, I don't know if they're still the top kingdoms there, but for a very long time they were. And this idea is because these games in the beginning, where you have to think about, you don't really know a lot of kind of what goes into a kingdom builder, what am I focusing on or not, right? It kind of makes sense on how this evolution would go from this type of player mindset to an alliance mindset and then to kind of a kingdom-wide mindset when it comes to increasing the percentage levels of success that you can see in these types of games, right, depending on what you focus and prioritize on. So Rise of Kingdoms eventually gets to this point where, right, they come out with the Imperium system, they start hampering down on migration, and you end up really getting involved in like the jumper boom, essentially, right? This jumper project idea of, okay, hey, we're going to take hundreds of players, multiple alliances, and we're going to prepare ourselves with giving players the best practices, the best resources and information and material they need to start brand new accounts. And we're going to go into a kingdom from day one, highly organized, again, being able to take over or be in multiple Zone 1 regions, if not all Zone 1 regions, or however they want to view it, depending on what that project's goals were. But the goals were or are. But the idea is to go into a kingdom day one as the most organized group outside of anyone else that would be going there. And the whole approach for this was to essentially take more of a kingdom a more kingdom-wide stance, where it's, okay, if we go in, regardless if we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plus alliances, we are going to put ourselves in the best position to be the governors, if you will, of the kingdom, right? To be more of the decision makers, to have more majority presence, to have more leverage, to have a little bit more clout build up, to have more of a say-so, maybe to be king or queen, whatever it may be. And me saying all of this is to explain and get to the point where we're at now, which is that when you look at Call of Dragons, the game has taken a little bit more of an alliance-focused approach. However, you have to understand that nothing has actually changed in Call of Dragons when you compare it to Rise of Kingdoms from a common denominator level, right? Remember, you still have a map, you still have alliances that players can join, you have different zones, you have a KVK, you have migration, right? You have to understand that there's nothing at a foundational level, at a baseline, that has changed in Call of Dragons that would make you think the game is more alliance-focused. And I'll give you an example. One thing that if they did this, to me, would really make the game more alliance-focused, if they doubled the amount of alliance member capacity, right? On average, when you look at Rock, you're probably averaging like, 170, 175 to maybe 200 player slots, right? Eventually when you get into your KVKs. Given that CoD has this back-to-back KVK approach that they're doing with no home kingdoms, no downtime, but you still have essentially about the same amount of player capacity, right? You're basically ranging like 150, 160 to 180, right? Give or take. That's kind of what you're seeing in the majority of KVKs currently in Call of Dragons. However, there's a lot more players than that in the actual game, and usually in your KVKs. So if you're going to have more of an alliance-focused approach, why not just double the alliance member capacity and allow for 300? Why not allow for 400 players to join alliances, right? Because to me, that would be something that would be a very unique approach, where you're allowing for alliances to really just be extremely big, and then allow for the focus to be more condensed, where you're not necessarily having as many alliances that are vying. When you have multiple alliances that are vying for contention or for power, right? Even though, yes, it's great to have maybe 10, 20 alliances that are all engaged, this is typically more reminiscent of a kingdom-wide approach versus an alliance-focused approach. And that's because when you have a lot of alliances that are participating in a fight, most of the time are coming from their own kingdom, right? This idea is, well, okay, well, we're going to union. It's not just going to be a battle royale free-for-all, right? And part of what, when you look at this alliance versus kingdom approach, is that's kind of what Call of Dragons was hoping for, right? They've mentioned this before in multiple instances where they talk about, oh, well, the whole reason we have the reset system as an example is because we want players to try and join other alliances, or for other alliances to be formed because of this, that may bring about more PvP, etc., right? That's kind of the paraphrased version of what they've said from dev Q&As, from columns and other areas on what some of the hopes are. The challenge is that this is just not how the player psychology works in Kingdom Builders, right? There are trends that we've seen across multiple Kingdom Builders that indicate the complete opposite of that approach, which is that alliances are more prone to want to actually group together, ally, union, and not just say, we're just going to solo, free-for-all it. Now, again, we're talking about the majority approach. We're not saying everyone is going to do this. You're always going to have some outlier examples. We've already seen a couple of those in some of the KVKs, right? Some of the most notable is probably like the EIS situation, that basically, from what we heard early on, they kind of wanted to, and this is in S2-7, right? We covered a PvP video there where people were saying they wanted to like 1v everyone, right? Even though it's really like 3 of them. Probably one of the more distinct ones is the TA situation. For a lot of people know, right? They started off in Kingdom 2, and they have just kind of been growing and growing. They're in S2-1 right now, but in the previous KVK, right, they were at one point kind of soloing, right, when they were in S1+. And it was just kind of this mega alliance approach where they just stacked everyone there and then eventually had to disperse because they just, there's challenges when you do things like that, right? And some of those challenges they recognize, and they kind of ended up making TM, and so now it's kind of TA and TM. But the idea is that there are things that kind of, some of these things contradict each other, some of them kind of go against the grain when it comes to Alliance versus Kingdoms. Anyways, let's now talk on topic 2, which is this idea of migration, but no home kingdoms. So migration is usually something that when you look at it from face value, migration is not something that you're usually saying, I'm going to use migration to just go and join this alliance and that's it. Typically, when you think about migration, traditionally, in games like Rise of Kingdoms and Infinity Kingdom, you're migrating first and foremost to a kingdom. An alliance in that kingdom, sure, but you are migrating to a kingdom, right, where you can access, and typically it's the home kingdom, right? But the plan is you're going to join an alliance that is in this kingdom with this hope of working with other players and or potentially other alliances that are in a kingdom. You're not just migrating to a kingdom or an alliance that's in a kingdom to just, like for example, if you think about this idea, I'll give you a great example. You think about this idea of migration. If you think about where someone would migrate, if you had two options, someone can migrate to a kingdom with only one alliance, right? Maybe 200 players max that can fit in this one alliance, or you're going to migrate to a kingdom with 1,000 active players, right? A lot of health and a lot of activity, and then they're going to join an alliance in there that can also be a part. I mean, to me, this is for more or less, and again, we're talking about the majority. This is a no-brainer, right? You would rather migrate to the healthier kingdom that has a lot more activity, a lot more population, and join a top, if not the strongest or the top, or just a active, healthy alliance there, compared to just going to a kingdom that has only one active alliance. Those are just few and far between. Right? Yes, is there a market for that? Is there a niche for that? There is. But it is not the majority, right? If you look across and you were to Q&A people on if they'd rather go to a kingdom like that or if they'd rather go to a healthy kingdom, I mean, the healthy kingdom would be the winner like 9.9 times out of 10. And the reason why is because this translates to more of a kingdom-wide approach, right? This is really what, like almost all the data, all the common sense, all of the trends are telling us this. And so the reason why this is kind of a kerfuffle to me is they have this migration system, but the migration system only allows for you to migrate. First off, the migration system allows for you to migrate to a kingdom, but there's no home kingdoms, right? That's the thing that really gets me, is that you can migrate in the game, right? When migration comes up at the end of season 2, right? Because that's the first time you can migrate. You migrate to a kingdom, but the challenge is that when you migrate to a kingdom, you can't see what alliances are there in that kingdom. You can't see what players are there in that home kingdom. There's no home kingdom leaderboards, no home kingdom stats. You don't even know who to contact, right? That to me is just mind-boggling, because at face value, and respectfully, it just doesn't make any sense. It's very hard to wrap your head around. You're going to migrate somewhere that you have no idea who's there. You don't even know who to contact. You don't even know who to join, right? The only way, and again, bear in mind, we're talking about if Discord didn't exist, if there was no other way to contact like kind of anyone outside of the game, and you're just thinking about being in the game. You click to migrate somewhere. Now, again, you could ask people in world chat and maybe someone will connect with you. But what we're talking about is, let's say, for example, you were not able to contact anybody and you wanted to migrate to a kingdom. You would have no idea who's from that kingdom. You'd have no idea who to join, right? Because the way that Call of Dragons works is that when you have these back-to-back KVK seasons, let's say I migrated. I'll give you a great example here. So let's go in, and let's say we're at the end of season 2. And you have all these kingdoms. Let's say I'm from Kingdom 2, and I want to go to Kingdom 1. End of the season comes up, migration opens, I migrate to Kingdom 1. But guess what? I'm basically in the same exact situation I am right now, which is that I don't know who's there. I don't know who to contact. I don't know who to reach out to. I don't know who to apply to, anything. Because once the next season comes around, the only thing that would change is that my server would just say, instead of 2, it would say 1. And then I'd probably be in a different division. But when I went to go look at the leaderboards that are just specific for that KVK, there's no indicator on here to tell me what kingdom any of these players are from. Same thing with alliances. There's nothing on here that tells me what kingdom these alliances are from. So I don't know who to apply to, right? It's kind of all superficial, if you will. Which is why, for me, that's the thing that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, right? Is that when I think about migration, this idea of not having home kingdom. Now, if there was home kingdom leaderboards, totally, now you're talking about really creating a level of uniqueness and kind of evolving to what I feel would be just an overall better situation, because then you're able to say, cool, well, these are the people that are a part of this kingdom that I'm in right now, right? At the moment, you're kind of superficially migrating somewhere, but you could basically still join any alliance that is in that next merged KVK that you're going to go into. So it's just as weird, right? It's somewhat off-putting. Like, it just doesn't make it's hard to grasp, I'll say. Okay. Now let's get into this idea of no home kingdom leaderboards. I know I briefly touched on it, but this is something I think is really important. Being able to have home kingdom leaderboards is so vital to a kingdom builder, where you can see who's there, what's the power growth that's happening, to get maybe a gauge on general activity, to see what alliances are there, how strong are the alliances, how active is the kingdom, for example, or better yet, maybe general population counts. Being able to look at who were the top fighters in that kingdom, right? That might tell you, oh, cool, what if I want to migrate to a kingdom that has a lot of people that fight a lot, and I want to be able to play with those people? Well, the only way you can really figure that out is if you have home kingdom leaderboards, because there's no way to find that out in a reasonable, healthy, efficient amount of time. Because the only way you really could do that is you'd have to go around and start messaging all the alliances and asking them, hey, what kingdom are you from? Okay, cool. Then you have to figure out all the alliances that are from that kingdom. Then you have to make sure that all the players in that specific alliance are from that home kingdom. And then you have to start tallying up all their kill points, deaths, etc. Right? That is just an insane amount of time that you would have to spend to figure all that out. However, if you had home kingdom leaderboards, you'd be able to do all of that before, which would then give you additional resources and context, and hopefully support to then make your own informed decision on what kingdoms you may or may not want to go to. So, to me, that's kind of a little bit of a conundrum. Now, is that an easy-ish fix to maybe add into the game? I hope so. It's something I'd love to see. I have a suggestion out on the Discord about it. But the fact that there is none, I don't know, it's just weird. It is. Again, I'm not saying that it's awful or it's like the worst thing ever, but it is weird. Then we get to number 4, which is this idea of resets versus kind of now scaled resets. So the game starts off as they wanted to do resets, right? This was the whole thing about, okay, when a new season starts, we're going to reset pretty much everything that matters. From hero levels to artifact levels, to resetting skills, even though the points that you invest there will still count. You're resetting talents, because obviously that corresponds with levels. You're resetting alliance tech. So basically you're going right back to essentially being a brand new alliance, even though you get to keep the name. You're resetting things like Arcane Dust, your EXP tomes, etc. And now what you're seeing, right? And I want to point out, I still believe this idea of resets to a degree, and if it's done in certain areas, is still great, right? I am on board for that, because to me, that's something unique that Call of Dragons is doing that I believe can still be utilized well, but it has to be in the right places and in the right areas. But now what you're seeing from the latest, right? And we're talking, this game was released, where's all my data? I have fantastic data here, because I'm going to tell you this real quick. So we have data on, here we go. So I got to bust out my everything spreadsheet here just so I can take a look. So the game itself, right, was globally released on January 9th. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Kingdom 32. Global release is March 28th of 2023, right? So the game has been out for 7 months, right? Almost 7 months, we'll say that. Almost 7 months. Kingdom 1 was released August 8th. This is in beta still, of 2022. So the game itself has been out for, a year and 2 months? A little bit more than that, almost a year and 3 months. But from global release, right, almost 7 months. And they start off with this reset idea, but now, from the last Q&A, we know that as early as the next update, which is going to be coming out in November, right? So when this video releases, probably 2-3 weeks, give or take, somewhere around there, you're going to end up seeing that next update come out, which may include some of those scaled back reset features that were mentioned in the most recent dev Q&A column. This, to me, is one of those things where there's kind of two ways to look at this. One, are they just trying something new because they feel like, okay, well, you know what, we tried this out. It's not really working the way we thought, but we're happy about it. And now we're going to try doing it this direction based on feedback? Or is it more of like feedback maybe kind of pressured in that way? Or is it more of, you know what, we see the value in it? And because there's a big difference between, are they feeling pressured to change something because the community's kind of outcrying for it? But there's not really a level of comprehension or them agreeing, let's say, with it, right? Like, for example, they could still disagree with it, but go forward with the change because the community just has overwhelming support for it. Or is it more of they're making the change because they see the value in it and they're okay with it because they wanted to try doing something different in the beginning, but now they understand that there's still value in doing it this way, even if it's scaled back. So that would be interesting to find out. However, when I talked about this before, this idea of scaling this back, like, for example, to me, I think some of the biggest areas, and probably the number one area, is this idea of alliance resets, right? I've said this almost since the beginning, which is that my view on alliance resets is they just shouldn't exist. I'm okay with the tech resetting, but the alliance member capacity should not reset, specifically for the first number, right? So let's say you have 160 players over 175 at the end of Season 1. You should then have 160 players over 80 going into Season 2, right? None of the players should be forced to be kicked out of their alliance. Again, I'm okay with the tech resetting. Reason why is because it allows you to keep getting alliance credits. Unless they came out with another method for that, for alliances that have already maxed tech, that's different. However, I do like this idea, again, because you still allow yourself to gain creds. Then they mentioned in there that they might do something with artifacts, they might do something with heroes, where they're going to scale back on the artifacts itself, and they might just allow for the EXP levels to keep being gained, and they're not going to reset those in seasons. They've also mentioned they might do a partial reset for hero levels, and so we'll see how that works. Now, this, again, is kind of starting to go and become more in line with how, again, and I'll just say simply, with how some other kingdom builders go, but with how Rock looks as well. And I've always said this, in addition, is that even if Call of Dragons, let's just say, reskinned a lot of things, a lot of features from Rock, but they kept their unique parts intact, for example, like we've talked about before, with the true ranged PvP, the flying over terrain, the on-field skill usage via artifacts, the ability to build on-field structures, that to me would still be enough. Like, we're talking at bare minimum. If it was just those four things, and you said, okay, well, everything else is basically the same, but these four things are totally different, I would still rather play Call of Dragons than Rise of Kingdoms, because I just feel that these features more align with what the average kingdom builder player, and probably more of the competitive player, wants to see out of a kingdom builder. This is coming more in line with like an MMO RTS, right? You're mixing Rome Total War with StarCraft with, World of Warcraft, like some type of other open field game, right? This Call of Dragons has such a great foundation at the moment that really, to me, I believe where we need to look more at is the quality of life. Look at what Call of Dragons does well, double down, invest in those areas. Sure, do some testings here and there, but then jam out the quality of life. There's so much opportunity there that even Rise of Kingdoms and other kingdom builders have not even tapped into anywhere close yet. So, then we get to this next one, right, which is kind of like this complicated war pet system, right? We've touched on this before, but the idea that the war pet system, in my view, was just too complicated when it initially debuted. There needed to be kind of this gradual introduction where, for example, they could have said, hey, we're going to bring out war pets and we're just going to allow for you to capture them and maybe level them up. And that's it. Just 2 basic things. And then in the next update, you know what? We'll add another layer on. This way, you allow for a kind of soft introduction. You allow for people to familiarize themselves with it, get comfortable with it, before you start adding more things on. A great example of this is when you think about how they developed, how they came out with what you can add on to marches, right? When you think of like something like rock, equipment wasn't a thing in the beginning. Same thing with Infinity Kingdom. Artifacts weren't a thing in the beginning. Now you look at Call of Dragons, right? I mean, again, artifacts were pretty basic, but, war pets obviously weren't always there, so you're kind of adding these things on. War pets is kind of the first thing that you're really seeing like that. But when these areas were introduced, they were, for the most part, in my view, not as complicated as the war pets are. And I think that was a missed opportunity, right? It was just kind of coming out a little bit too strong. I think the idea is cool on paper. I'm not necessarily against it, but I do feel that it needed to be scaled back and really started off at kind of this level 1 approach, and then you kind of build on it update to update. Then we get to map designs. This, to me, is probably the next biggest area that really comes into kind of what direction are they going in. You look at thus far, and in my opinion, the best map design that they have come out with is the S1 Plus map. This is what we're talking about, where it's kind of in this identity crisis of what do we want to be. You go from Season 1, which basically is an introduction season. We get that, right? You don't necessarily want to have kind of full brawling PvP. You want it to be more of, hey, here's our game. Here's an introduction to our game. Here's a Season 1 map that hopefully allows for you to familiarize yourself with the game and enjoy it to where you'll keep playing it. But then you look at them taking what they learned from Season 1 and improving that in 1 Plus, which in my view, 1 Plus, I just feel should stay in the game. I'm not mad. I am disappointed. That's the right word. I'm disappointed that the Season 1 Plus map is going away because I think the map design is great. But then you look at Season 2. And Season 2 basically takes this idea of kind of a scale back from 1 Plus, but is almost a tiny bit better than Season 1, right? It's about the same, but just ever so slightly. I mean, we're talking if the Season 1 map is a 1, then the Season 2 map is like a 1.5. And the Season 1 Plus map, to me, is like a 3 or a 4, right? Out of 5, I would say. Something around, probably a 3. Or maybe 3.5, something like that. And to me, that's where it just feels like it's a toss-up, right? I'm like, my thought is, where are they going with this? Like, how do you go from Season 1 Plus, making improvements, and the map was better. Everyone loves Season 1 Plus for the most part. But then you go to Season 2, and it's like now we're taking 2 or 3 steps back. And that, to me, is, I think, a part of where you're seeing this identity crisis, and hopefully it'll be a good building block opportunity to see where the game will go beyond that. And then we get this next one, which is kind of like not investing in what is working, right? And this loosely is about the map design. It's loosely about the PvP. It's loosely about things like on-field structures. It's about alliances, investing in what is working, right? Everyone loves the open field. Open field PvP is, for the most part, what Call of Dragons is really about, right? There's not really a huge emphasis on rallies. Even though rallies are there, that is not where the majority of the PvP is being done. It's in the open field. And guess what? Everyone loves that. Invest in that. Double down on that. Same thing with alliances. Invest in the quality of life. Double down on the quality of life. Similar things when we talk about PvP. For example, I'll give you one example. One thing I would love to see in the game would be height elevation differentials, right? So, for example, if you have if you have a mage or an archer, and you're on a cliff or on a second level, an elevated level, you should get like a 3 to 5% range increase. That, to me, not like we've talked about this before, not where it's OP or it's broken, and you can always adjust it. But to me, that seems like something that would be a little bit more realistic. Again, not game breaking, but it would add such a dope layer to the game that I don't know any other Kingdom Builder that has done that. I'm talking a popular recent Kingdom Builder that has actually implemented this type of function or mechanic. These are the types of things that we're talking about, right? So again, that's just one example, but it's kind of what I mean when I talk about investing in what you currently have and invest in what's working. This other thing about having no kind of king system, right? I will tell you the majority of Kingdom Builders on the market, we're talking popular ones, have some type of king-queen system. in the game. Now, I'm not saying that every single game has to have this, but you also need to recognize the value that having a king or queen system provides. I will give you one example of the value of a king or queen. Actually, sorry, I'll give you maybe two or three. Probably the most important one to me is that it allows for you to organize an entire player base with something like a king's mail, which is essentially you being able to send a message to every single player in the entire kingdom and everyone gets it. This can do a plethora of things for you. For example, you can organize and get so many people from your kingdom onto your kingdom Discord, which would allow for you to have a lot more flexibility, a lot more customization. It gives you this way to inform and to educate players by having more support and tool access on something like a Discord compared to what you can have in game. You can also do voice calls, for example, do meetings, town halls, etc. You could organize for big PvP events, right, where you have hundreds of people in a call together. There is just so much value in being able to. You can also educate and inform people in King's Mails. You can write a mail that gives people good tips, good practices to try to raise the bar, right? That rising tide lifts all boats analogy of allowing for people's baseline level of knowledge and experience to constantly grow at a high rate, especially if you have individuals or a kingdom that sends very well-written and informative mails. It also can allow for players to feel more engaged, therefore increase activity, increase replayability, and be more likely to not leave the game and quit, or even to not stop spending money, or maybe even spend money. Right? There are so many ridiculous positive reasons on just this one element of the game that other games have consistently done. Then you talk about number two, which is this idea of being able to, for example, pop like things like king or queen buffs, right? While you're in your home kingdom, right? I think buffs are incredibly important where it allows for you to give, especially if you coordinate it right, it allows for you to kind of boost progress and boost develop players for a short period of time, but it still helps them when it comes to leveling buildings, researching tech faster, gathering faster. These are things that are really good for the game, I truly believe. And then probably the third thing, or not maybe tied for second, is this idea of being able to actually, and this is kind of a new concept, but being able to control migration, where you basically have this accept-deny idea, where you can choose who gets into a kingdom and who does not get into a kingdom. This is my view on kingdoms really becoming more autonomous and having true control over who can get into the game, who can get into your kingdom and not get into your kingdom, instead of anyone really being able to join, even if they're at a lower power level, for example, or a higher power level, depending on what the game is and what their restrictions are, and putting the control really in that of the players, because remember, those are the individuals who are actually governing and managing the kingdom and the players that are in it, right? The game really should just be providing tools and resources and assets in order for management to do more of these things. And anyways, those are just a few things, right, that I truly believe in when it comes to what I would love to see something like Call of Dragons do, and I think that it would incredibly benefit the game. Right, this idea of the narrative being pushed that the game is more alliance focused and we shouldn't do these things like other games. Like, you really have to understand where the value is. Like, you have to really understand what is the true benefit. How would this turn the game to be negative, or would it actually be more of a positive? And the fact is that there really isn't a downside. Right, these are things that are actually very healthy for these types of particular games because they're already trending in that way from day one. And we talked about this thing like no king system. We talked about this thing about season resets a bit. And then this, I'm just going to mention this last part here, which is this thing about resets where the alliances want to feel like they have it. Alliances are a community. Let me state that. And the challenge, like we talked about, when you have alliances reset, and we've seen countless amounts of feedback about this, where it is very negatively impacting to the player experience, right? It's not so much that players are, going to immediately stop playing the moment it happens once, but it is a huge inconvenience, and it is a turnoff to a number of players that are essentially kicked out of their alliance, have to either go and join another alliance if they can't get into that existing alliance or the one they played with last season right away. And that can lead to players either not going back to their home alliance, lowering their playing time, becoming disincentivized, demotivated. It's a very hard pill to swallow, right? If I'm in an alliance with 150, 175, 200 players and I'm playing with them all season long, and we've had an opportunity to build a good community, because you have to understand, it's not just about the players that are there in the alliances. You really have to understand how an alliance works on increasing its level of engagement and filtering out inactive players to bring in more active players, right? There's a lot of work that goes into it. And those are just two small things, right? If you talk to alliance leaders and they tell you how it is almost basically a full-time job to manage this alliance, and then at the end of the season, they come to find out that all the players in the alliance are getting kicked out and they have to go through all this work on top of their already existing workload that they know they're going to have to do for the next season, I mean, straight up, just like quit life at that point. I mean, that is such a slap in the face. And I think that's something where if you're a developer, that can maybe be hard to understand if you have not experienced it and done it yourself when it comes to really fully immersing yourself in managing an alliance, having that alliance be successful, and being able to carry that success and activity from season to season to season. Right? Because there's a lot that goes into it. And I think when we have this situation, this is kind of what I'll summarize here at the end, because we're almost at, 36 minutes, is the thing I'll say. And regardless if you agree or disagree with this point, I very much believe it to be the truth. And I will say, and I'm going to state this before I say this, because this, again, is not a slight on developers or creators of games. But one of the things, and this might be a bigger topic, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say on this one. One of the biggest things I've come to realize is that I don't know too many people, right? So it's kind of like I don't know what I don't know, right? Or you don't know what you don't know, right? That saying. I don't know how many developers truly, really immerse themselves in Kingdom Builders where they are able to have a pulse and what I would consider to be a full, complete understanding on all the different facets of what goes into a Kingdom Builder, right? I'm not talking just playing the game the way it was designed. I'm talking about really understanding how much goes into it beyond what the mechanics and the features of the game allow for you to do when it comes to progressing your account, joining an alliance, going out in PvP. There are so many more things that go on in the game that it reminds me of that Aladdin song. It's a whole new world. I mean, literally, it is. And so this is something that I would love the opportunity to just sit down with some developers and just ask them questions to see if they really have what I would consider, right? Not as a way to be like, oh, I gotcha, but really as a way to start a healthy conversation on what is your current understanding of the game? Are you familiar that these things happen in the game? Have you done these things yourselves? Right? Because I think those, when you are able to have a healthy conversation, right, that progresses in a good positive direction, where two opposing parties, right, two parties can kind of come to a conclusion or compromise, if you will, of thoughts, ideas, of understandings, that's really where you can get some magic happening, right, and some good progression that goes forward from there. So anyways, that's it for me. I think that was probably my last one on that. We're almost at 40 minutes. However, I would love to know what you think. Right now, I want to mention lastly, I did not cover all the things I really would have wanted to talk about, but I did try to pick out what I felt were some of the more important points. And again, I'm going to pass the question to you. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree on any of the points that I made? Do you have additional points that you feel goes or plays into this notion of Call of Dragons is having a little bit of an identity crisis, or maybe a good amount, or a lot of a big identity crisis? And let me know what you think those things are. Or if you have a different viewpoint on something I talked about that maybe I didn't touch on, let me know. So again, tell me anything and everything in the comments down below. That's going to do it for me. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.